Welcome to the monthly webinar for the Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice on E-Extension. My name is Jackie Jacob, and I'm the coordinator for the Community of Practice Small and Backyard Flocks, and I organized the webinars. This month's webinar is on raising ducks for egg production. And Dr. Brigid McCrea from Delaware State University will be discussing the issue. All yours, Brigid.
Thank you, Dr. Jacob. Well, I was asked to put this together a while ago, and I've got it some hints there, but I think a lot of people are going to be surprised that it's not too terribly different in overall concept from raising chickens for egg production. What you want to do with those eggs after they're laid is completely up to you all, and maybe that's a different presentation for a different time. But I'll get started here. I'll just do... Maybe I'll click on it. There we go. Can you see that okay?
Looks good.
All right. So a lot of people want to do something to get them into a niche market. Maybe they are hitting farmers markets or locations that have plenty of brown-shelled eggs. They can't get enough blue-green shelled eggs to really differentiate themselves, so they go the duck egg route. And there is a market for duck eggs. Some cooks prefer the taste and the texture of duck eggs over that of chicken eggs. So let's talk about how to get your ducks in good egg production mode. So we're going to cover feeds as well as feeders, water and waterers, because that is an important part of happy duck management, floor space, lighting, heat, egg collection, some breeds for you to consider, and then routines and stresses, things that you may not think are all that important because you have chickens, but now we're dealing with ducks. Here we go. So as far as feeders are concerned, ducks have a little bit longer head than most chickens, and they also have a slightly wider head. So that's something to consider in choosing a feeder. If you're looking to repurpose old chicken feeders, most will do the trick, but you may have to find that beyond the growth stage, when these birds become adult size, you may need something a little bit larger than what you are used to for getting your chickens. That means you're going to have to start searching for openings that are a little bit wider, maybe have a little bit more height, because ducks like to lift their head up and let the food go back. And just like chickens, as I mentioned before, there are some similarities. Just like chickens, you want those feeders to be adjusted to the height of the middle of the back. So it's best to have just one breed in your flock, and hopefully one age, so that they can all be at the same height when you're going to feed them. I like to take things apart in the store. So if it's shrink wrapped, I will go up to the feed store manager and say, hey, I'm looking at this for feeding ducks. Can I open up the shrink wrap and take it apart and see if I can get my hands in there to clean it? And most feed store owners do not have an issue with you doing this. However, make sure that you put it back together and it's not hard to get your hands in and out of there. Test it, reassemble it, and see if it's something that you're willing to work with without getting cuts or banging your knuckles on it. Or, it used to be Waters had the grooves on the inside. They were terrible to keep those clean. So you want to check everything out in advance prior to your purchase. And of course, mash feed. Mash feed is cheap. Mash feed is cheap for a reason, because it gets wasted at a great deal higher rate than, say, crumbles or pelleted feed. So if you're getting a feeder because you think it might be good for keeping the mash in place, maybe you need to consider switching to a crumble or a pellet to help you save some dollars. And now, really feeding birds the right diet is one of the most important aspects of this whole experience. the bird's body changes from a growth phase into a breeder phase or an egg-laying phase. And it's easy to find balanced diets. Getting a duck breeder diet, most feed stores will order for you exactly what you need. Now, that doesn't mean that they always carry it in stock, but you need to know how much advance warning they need to get your order in a timely manner so that you can get that balanced diet. And you really do want a balanced diet for these birds that are trying to produce eggs. Eggs can be forfeited. Eggs are a luxury for a bird. Birds will choose life over choosing egg production. So if you're not feeding them exactly what they need for good quality, consistent egg production, they're just going to stop laying eggs. And if that's what you've got these birds for, then you need to figure out what you're doing wrong, or at least put them on a balanced diet until you get them back into egg production mode. So when they're young, feed them a duck starter or a waterfowl starter. Then from about 3 weeks until maybe week 20 or so, you're going to give them a grower. After that time, when they start laying, about a couple weeks before they start laying, you want to have them on a breeder diet. So let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. For your breeder diet, you want 1,300 calories per pound, 15% protein, 2.75% calcium, and 0.6% phosphorus. All this is on the feed tag label, and most feed stores are quite happy to let you turn a bag over and look at these things and see if it's going to provide exactly what you need. A lot of people, they impose their own perceptions of how happy a flock is, and they try to change things up. Ducks really don't handle change very well, so keep that diet consistent and they will lay for you consistently. Keep your time of day that you're feeding consistent, and try not to change things up like run out of feed or go grab a bag of chicken feed because you ran out of duck feed. They don't necessarily respond well to those kinds of changes. Young birds always need feed in front of them, so that's ad libitum feeding. However, as your duck egg layers are growing, you can limit feed them. You don't want overweight birds by the time they are of egg laying size. About 0.35 of a pound per bird per day, and you can split that into a morning feeding and an afternoon feeding. Some people say that you can feed them all at once if you want, and you should have everything cleaned up within 15 minutes. So nothing gets left behind to feed the Tweety birds in your yard. As your birds start to have longer and longer days, if you get ducklings early in spring and your days lengthen, you can actually increase the amount of feed as their bodies mature. What you're trying to do is make sure that you control the maturation of their body so that you don't end up with egg prolapse, or what's sometimes called a blowout. That's a nasty situation. It's not great for the bird. It can lead to cannibalism in your flock, even in ducks. We talk about this in chickens, but it happens in ducks too. So you want to increase your days. You can either add a little light in the morning and a little light in the afternoon or in the evening after the sun goes down. But when they are at 40% production, then you want to give them full feed. Whatever they want to eat at all times, you should keep feed in front of them. So here's the real question. If you can't afford chicken feed and you think you may be able to get some more profits off of duck feed, ducks eat a little bit more than chickens, and if you can't afford to keep the right feed in front of them at all times, either reduce the size of your flock so that you can get them the feed that they need to lay those eggs that you're trying to sell, or consider maybe going back to chickens because they don't eat quite as much feed. So those are some real serious considerations for you to have in the back of your mind as you're going through this process. If Feeding greens. A lot of people know that it's very popular to feed treats and greens and snacks and kitchen waste to your chickens. Really, some of those things you're going to have to cut back on. Feeding greens to your ducks is fine after the first 3 weeks of their life. You give them small amounts, you give them some greens, whether it's grass from your lawn or maybe you're growing something specific that you want to cut for them, whether it's clover, something along those lines. For your growing birds, if you have them out on pasture, give them their evening feedings only. That will mean that they're out there mowing your pasture the rest of the day. But if you have birds in pens and you don't have access to pasture and you're providing greens, then you have lots of things that you can give them. A little bit of alfalfa or dandelions. Oh, yes, I have a few of those in my yard. They can come get those. Dandelion leaves are also great for them to munch on. And for those really young birds, you're going to have to snip them up into small sizes so that they don't choke on them. Okay, we're talking ducks, right? Ducks and water go hand in hand. So when you're managing ducks, you're really managing ducks and the copious amounts of water that they will try to spread everywhere. So you don't want to be that person that your neighbors are always complaining about. So it's not only managing ducks, but it's managing their wastewater. As far as giving them water to drink, you want fresh and clean at all times. You want, a water that's easy to clean and reassemble, take it apart. It should be at the height of the bird's back, but it should be deep enough that the birds can immerse their heads. And if you have a duck's head like so, and their eyes are back here, they want to be able to keep their eyes clean, and so they will dip their heads in several times. That means that the water isn't going to stay in the water. It doesn't necessarily end up inside them. It ends up on the outside of them. So whatever watering system you have needs to have a really good, well thought out drainage system, a catchment system beneath that water. That water is going to be filled up. If you've got like a bucket or something underneath there, you got to clean it 2 or 3 times a day. I encourage people to have some sort of plastic pipe or catchment system that leads outside of the pen and drains somewhere where you can kind of control where that water ends up. And just have your water on a float valve so that they can always have fresh, clean water. It flows in fresh all the time. And it's your drainage system, you got to have access to it. It's got to be easy to clean, whether it's something that you hose out on a daily basis or either way, you need to have a drainage system so that that water from the duck doesn't end up in your litter causing lots of ammonia production or spreading some sort of disease amongst your flock. Here's the big question. You don't have to have a pond to have waterfowl. Some of them do just fine in cages. However, a lot of people have this perception that, I have ducks, I have to provide a pond. No, you don't. You should have an area that if you want them to swim in, you should be able to clean it regularly. So if you're going to have a pond or you're going to have a creek, let's focus on pond first. If you're going to have a pond, you need to have some sort of a pond management system. So taking a book from some of my colleagues here at Delaware State University, it becomes a management system, an aquaculture management system. So fresh, clean water needs to be brought in. Flowing water is best. So if there's a filtration system for the outgoing water that cleans it up before it comes back in, or you've got a creek on your property so you have constantly flowing water, you want your water to overturn almost on a daily basis. If you have to drain a pond, do it on a weekly basis. That's, where are you going to put all that water? How big is your pond? You're dealing with water discharge here. And depending on your neighbors and how you're set up and what state you're in and some of the rules, that discharge may be problematic. You're going to have to clean that pond regularly on a weekly basis. And of course, ponds break, linings tear. Ducks have some pretty strong claws on their feet, and if you've got a pond liner, they're going to tear it up eventually, and it's going to have to be replaced. Some of the monies that you set aside from the profits will go to pond maintenance. And one of the worst parts that everyone doesn't think about until it's too late is erosion control. As these birds move into the pond, they tend to stay right around the edge of the pond. And depending on the slope and what you've got planted, they can cause a great deal of erosion, which and they will defecate there. So that's part of your management plan. I like to see ponds with aerators in them to keep the pond water moving and avoid stagnant spaces. And that helps aerate the pond water, and depending on how size of your pond, you may have fish in there. They'll appreciate it too. So if you are going to have birds in cages, like say the larger birds, they do okay. Bantam birds, not so much in cages, because when they're really little, their legs and their feet are really little. And they have a hard time staying above the wire cage floor. So not really for bantam birds, but yeah, you can have a larger duck on 3/8-inch wire, and they'll do just fine. One of the things that ducks explore everything with their beak, which means if you've got sawdust in the brooding area, the first 3 weeks, they're not really going to have the common sense to differentiate that from feed. So I don't like giving ducks sawdust in the very beginning. I prefer wood chips, and then once they figured out, oh, this is feed, then you can give them some sawdust, and they go, oh yeah, that doesn't taste nearly as good. Maybe I'll leave that alone. Otherwise, there have been instances when ducklings just gorge on sawdust and they don't make it. So whatever litter you use, keep it deep, soft, and clean, but avoid sawdust in the very beginning. I think I have a typo here. What did I write down there? Oh dear. Okay, well, certain types of litter can really crowding. That's what I put there. I forgot the D in crowding. Certain birds don't do well when they're crowded together. Game birds, for prime example, and also waterfowl, they don't like to be crowded together. You may or may not get compensatory growth later on, but you might have also an increase in mortality. Depending on how much you spent on those birds, give them the space they need. So first couple of weeks, 1/2 square foot per bird, double that space every 2 weeks until you get to about 4 square feet per bird. And, watch the weather. Is that the time when you want to open up the door and let them go outside? How's their feathering coming along? If you're going to have a cold snap or some sort of weather event, I would keep them in until that's passed. Only you know the area in which you live, and you have to watch those sorts of details so they don't go outside and get chilled. So they need a great deal of space. We usually say that commercial birds need much less space. However, a lot of backyard chicken people, they want 2 square feet of interior coop space per bird. You need double that for ducks. Heat, not totally different from chickens in any way. You want about 90 degrees Fahrenheit for the first 10 days. You measure that about 3 inches above the litter, and drop the temperature every 5 degrees every week after the first 10 days, and then you watch them feather out. When they're about 6 weeks old, they should be well feathered, and then you can take them on outside visits. Watch the weather, provide supplementary heat if need be, bring them in at night if you need to, all those sorts of good details, and But have a heat lamp or a sweeter heater or some infrared heat device like an EcoGlow for them when they are in the brooding stage, and they will greatly appreciate that. Ducks react pretty strongly to things that can startle them. So wind can cause trees to move and shake, and that can disrupt them and startle them, but it can also make them very cold. Here on Delmarva, we've got a pretty strong wind that blows from the west towards the east during most of the year. And so you want to face your shelter so that they can get a break from the wind. A three-sided shelter is great, or you can use a regular old chicken coop. You probably will have to widen the door, make it a little taller or maybe a little wider, depending on the breed that you use. But if you are going to have an indoor space, just like with chicken coops, you need to ventilate it well using an attic fan or some sort of ventilation system that you set up, or passive ventilation. And ducklings, if you put them in the pond when they're really little, before they're 3 weeks old, you have to play lifeguard. They will get chilled very easily. They'll freak out that you're putting them in a bucket of water. And then usually when they've got one or two buddies with them, then they're okay. And then they figure out, oh, hey, I can scoot around in this. But if you leave them in there for more than 15 minutes, then they become submarines because they're not very water resistant yet. So pretty soon they start to sink lower and lower and lower in the water until just their neck is sticking out. And they'll get pretty tired and chilled. And if you don't take them out of that water and kind of squeegee them off a little bit, put them under a heat source, then they can get chilled, then they start to crowd, and you can end up with flip overs, and sometimes if they flip over, it's just a sign of exhaustion and perhaps death will follow. So you got to play the lifeguard. Don't let them swim any longer than, say, 5-10 minutes, and if you can see that somebody's getting tired or starting to really absorb a lot of that water and they're down, take them out and let them dry themselves off. For egg collection, number one thing, it's not going to be very unlike your poultry operation. You don't need a male duck for a duck hen to lay eggs. And I like to see colony nests, something that's about a foot deep and maybe 2 or 3 feet long with a little lip on the edge so that the ducks can go in there and lay in groups. You can have a slanted floor and that'll roll those eggs away from them. Having a little astroturf material inside those nest boxes means that the ducks don't decide to just stay in there. So collect your eggs a couple times a day, 2 or 3 times is best. In the summer, you don't want those eggs to get too hot in the winter, or they may freeze, so you want to pick them up regularly. Ducks can be messy, and if you're having a problem controlling your mud situation outside, or they're tracking in mud in the winter or in the spring, that can translate to dirty eggs, and you want to make sure you wash those before you put them into storage. Keep your nest clean once a week. Take those astroturf mats out and wash them, disinfect them, and dry them, then replace them. If you're going to use sawdust or shavings in there, that's great. I like it better than straw, unless you've got chopped straw, which is chopped to about less than an inch, because straw tends to create more of an ammonia situation because it's not absorbent if it's too long pieces of straw. You need chopped straw that's very small. Let's talk about breeds. Probably most of you that listened in on this presentation were really here to listen to the breed part. But I'm talking about that last because there are so many other things you have to think about and plan before you actually make that order of ducklings. Most of your really good layers are of a smaller body size. The Khaki Campbell, which lays 200 to 300 eggs a year. Indian Runner, a little less efficient, 100 to 150 eggs a year. The larger size is the Pekin. They lay 100 to 180 eggs a year. However, they're also good for meat production. So if you were going to maybe get a straight run set of ducklings. Some will end up being males. You can raise them up for meat production. Some will be females, and you can keep those for egg production. However, far and away better off than the pekin or the straight Indian runners are the white layer hybrids, about 290 eggs a year. And also a couple companies out there have different names for what's called a kind of a buffy colored duck. Looks like it's crossed with a khaki Campbell. The Golden 300 or Gold Star hybrid, about 290 eggs a year. So no, they don't necessarily lay quite as well as a Leghorn chicken or even some brown egg layer chicken strains, but if this is for profit, then you might want to try a khaki Campbell white layer hybrid or Gold 300. However, Indian runners are kind of fun to look at. This is what a khaki Campbell looks like. You don't need the males, so the females are kind of a nice brown color with the heads being a slightly darker shade. Indian runners, a lot of people just think they look hilarious because they have a very upright station. Just think of them as a wine bottle with legs and a beak. Great personality, light-bodied bird, and I just think they're hilarious. The pekin, a larger bodied bird, but it's that traditional farmyard duck that everyone thinks of when everybody thinks of a duck in a farmyard, a white duck in a farmyard. There you go, it's an example of a pekin. And here's what that Golden 300 Gold Star looks like. Again, you don't need the male bird, you would just need the female bird, and that's a brown duck. And the white layer doesn't look all that different from, say, a white pekin. It's just slightly smaller in body size. So here's the deal with ducks. They want you to have a routine. They don't like you to stray from that routine because, they really don't like surprises. They like to hear you coming. They like to see you coming. So if you've got a window that you pass in front of before you come in the door, that'll help give them a heads up. Things like shadows or windy days that make a branch wave in front of a window or rattle against the sides of a coop. They really don't like those sorts of stresses. Keep the bedding clean, keep predators out, and they should keep laying for you very nicely. Avoid overcrowding. Think of your indoor space as the go-to space. Every outdoor space is just extra. Don't count on them having access to that outdoor space all the time. There's many reasons why you might have to coop your birds up. A snow event, a storm, a local disease. What if avian influenza comes to town and you have to lock them up? Are you set up to do that? So those are some of the biosecurity things that you have to think about. And of course, for ducks, they tend to have shaft lice on their wings, and you need to check that. That's hard to see on the brown feathers. You kind of have to hold that wing up to light and look through as the light shines down, and you'll see these little specks in there, and you know that they're shaft lice. Check your ducks regularly for sticky eyes. See if somebody's having a hard time cleaning their face in the water. And keep foreign objects out of the coop because ducks, like chickens, will eat just about anything they think is interesting. So, to keep nails and screws and anything like that out of the coop. Run a magnet around the coop if you're just building it for them to clean up the outdoor space, even the indoor space. Make sure you pick up those things in advance. So there you have it. That is a nice little presentation on raising ducks for egg production. And as you can see, it's not too terribly different from chicken production. The diets will be different. You need to get waterfowl diets, not chicken diets. And some people say you should not feed medicated feed to ducklings. And if you're going to get a duckling starter, get a duckling starter. Don't feed them chicken feed. I like to get something that's specific for the birds and their age. So, Dr. Jacob, I think I will turn it over to you. Thank you for allowing me to give this presentation.
Thank you very much for being willing to do it. With your last comment, the reason you don't feed chicken medicated feed to ducks is because the level of inclusion of the medication is meant for the volume of feed that chickens will eat, and ducks eat more than that, so they get an overdose of the medication and it can be toxic to them. So that's
feed the right feed for the right age.
Yeah, the right type of bird and everything else. Well, thank you very much. For those watching, if it's not too late, the October webinar will be on the safe handling of eggs from small and backyard flocks. There will be a discussion on to wash or not to wash, which is an issue that's even discussed and debated within specialists themselves. And November's will be understanding and meeting your market, conducting a local customer survey. So hopefully you will be able to join us in some of our future webinars.